Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third session as part of our Launchpad Ask Me Anything series. We're all very welcome to be here today. I'm Sarah Lamont, the Program Manager of EduGrowth. I'd like to welcome everyone watching us via Slido. For those that haven't used Slido before, please submit questions into Slido throughout the session today. I'll be able to get to as many as I can with today's guest speakers. But before we begin, I'd like to pause and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So whilst we are dispersed across many traditional lands, we are connected virtually. I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation. I acknowledge their continuous and unbroken custodianship of the land, waters, and culture of this country. And I thank elders past, present, and emerging for allowing us to gather here today. I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Torres Strait peoples with us here today. So the Ask Me Anything series is part of an EduGrowth Launchpad program designed to support startups based on their current development of growth. So today's session is the third of three that we've already hosted, connecting EdTech entrepreneurs with early stage startups. So this program is shaped by you, as the title suggests. So questions are submitted by you, and we'll continue to answer your questions throughout Slido. So another prompt, please do use the Slido chat for questions, and even to introduce yourself as we kick off today. So I am delighted to get into this session and introduce to you our two guest speakers. We're joined by two fantastic EdTech entrepreneurs, Cleo Westhorpe, the co-founder of the Inclusive School and Pivot Professional Learning, and Nikki Bonus, the CEO and founder of Life Skills Group. I might just give them another intro here for Cleo. So Cleo is parts educator and entrepreneur. Having extensive education experience, Cleo has gone to co-found the two EdTech companies that I've named before, Pivot Professional Learning and the Inclusive School. And Nikki, who joins us, is the founder and CEO of Life Skills Group, bringing more than 20 years of education experience in the development, measurement, and delivery of social, emotional learning, leadership, and wellbeing programs for schools. So welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you both here. Now, I've just given a very, very brief introduction to who you both are and what you do. Would barely scratch the surface. So what I'd like to do is start off with hearing a little bit more about each of your founder journeys, specifically in the EdTech space. So maybe, Nikki, I'll go to you first. Can you briefly share why EdTech and how you got to this point in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. So for us, we're a little bit different in a way. We actually started through face-to-face programs delivering into schools for over 12 years. And we were delivering social emotional learning programs and wellbeing programs, not only to teachers, but to students. And what we found was the demand for what we were doing was so large that the only way that we could begin to not only share the knowledge of what we gained, but also to scale was to build our own sort of technology and software and to take that with us. And the big thing that we found, particularly in delivering programs, was in education, there was no way of measuring programs. So we sort of identified this need as we were developing the face-to-face programs of how we could begin to, a need within schools of how are they actually measuring a wellbeing program and what do they need? And that begun my journey. So I'll keep it really brief, but there you go.
Great, thanks, Nikki. And then Cleo, same question to you. Why EdTech? And tell us a bit about how you got to this point in your journey.
Thank you. So, I mean, look, my background is as an educator, and I guess as a teacher who's always been very curious about what makes students tick and what makes learning work in our classrooms. And part of that is actually a teacher engaging in really reflective practice and understanding what's working, how it's working, and how we can perhaps leverage that for, even more students to benefit from in the future. And so Pivot, had a number of different drivers originally. My two co-founders, both real experts in the policy and government space, as well as data, and then myself bringing that educator lens. We discovered that there was I guess, an opportunity to scale up the ability of teachers to gather feedback from their students. That's where we really started as a way to gather student perceptions around the learning and the teaching practice, what they're experiencing each and every day. And so for us, we were, I guess, bringing a different solution to a problem that already existed and leveraging technology to be able to do that. And that's how we began. And we really did jump straight into, the research and how developing our own bespoke software might serve us.
Yeah, fantastic. I imagine there'll be many people on today's call who are of a similar journey to you, being an educator, seeing an issue, and then using technology to leverage for a solution. So let's get into first question, which is about getting a product into the field. So question for you, maybe we'll start with you, Cleo. How do you introduce a new product into the education market? Do you have specifically any techniques or strategies that you've found to be most successful?
Oh, look, product development is it's something that I guess I'm a bit of a maverick at, and certainly don't have any official training. I know there are a lot of wonderful product experts out there who are doing incredible work in edtech companies. I think for us, we have always, it's almost like we've had a hunch, or we've observed a need for a product, and then we've actually sort of engaged in a really, I guess, a bit of a deep dive. Probably Nikki will have a similar approach, really trying to understand what that problem is, but also to be thinking about, okay, this is important now. Is it important enough for us to go ahead and solve it and to sink money, time, effort, energy into finding a solution? What could that pain point look like in 5 years' time? Is it still going to be there, or is this just something which is sort of rolling through and a problem of a contemporary problem? But also really making sure that you go and you get deep, knee deep, neck deep in the research that surrounds that. So understanding, what does the educational research tell you? What are the evidence-based practices or the evidence base that might support that solution, and making sure that was woven in. And that's always been really important for us in developing new product lines, that it has absolutely been rooted in, what educational research and the trends that are happening there. So, we've had the benefit of being able to ride the wave of digital transformation as well. But, there's also a really sophisticated consumer out there in terms of our educators, our teachers, our principals, and as well as our students, becoming well aware that, there is a science of learning, there's a science of reading. We can look at, evidence-based interventions. We can think about cognition. There's all of these different elements that you can bring in to, I guess, ensure that your product has really great product market fit, because the school market is one that is looking for evidence and research.
Yeah. Nikki, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, Claire, you answered that beautifully. I think one of the things, I suppose, in terms of sharing our learnings would be to have a diverse variety. If you are entering into the market, very much what Claire said, make sure that it's evidence-based, make sure that you've really got those foundations, but also testing the diversity. People often talk about having friendlies, and I think you want to have friendlies, but you don't want them too friendly, because they're going to tell you everything that you want them to tell you, or they're going to tell you everything that you kind of want to hear. And I always say to people when they're starting out, your evangelists, or the people that love what you're doing, are interesting, but go to the people that are not your evangelists. Find out why, what's blocking them, because you're going to learn more from them than you are from the people that are really going to lift you up. And spend time with people that maybe don't get your idea or don't see the problem, and try and sort of find out the spaces in between, because eventually, once you start rolling out, your evangelists or the people, your early adopters, are only a small market. You really want to know the other side of the market and how you can work with them.
Fantastic. And I guess building off of what you both mentioned about building an evidence base for your solution, a part of that is proof of concept and pilot projects and programs. So we have a question around that as well. which is, in your experience, what is the best way to approach schools and onboard, pilot schools? And maybe I'll add to that as well for a proof of concept, product market fit purpose as well. I might go to you, Nikki, first.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting one, and I'll just sort of break that down a little bit if that's okay. I think first and foremost, it's hard to get into schools, and I think that's something that we don't really talk about. I think building relationship and also building a relationship with the school to let you begin to pilot is really important. Everything about schools are about relationships. So having a handful of pilots that you really be selective, like I was saying, not like I was saying, my support would be have a diversity in terms of size, location, the socioeconomic area. But in terms of building those relationships with those pilot schools, the first and foremost part of approaching a school would be hopefully you've been testing or you've been validating, and you want to have sort of a minimum of 10 that you can be working with. And again, this is just my suggestion. Building those relationships and being available, putting in the time and effort, and really listening to them. So when you are approaching them, I've watched a lot of early stage ed tech companies not listen to the feedback that's coming back, particularly when you're rolling a pilot. They'll have an idea of what they want to roll out. They'll have an idea of a solution. And I'd say one of the biggest learnings that we've had is talk less, listen more. Ask lots and lots and lots and lots of questions, because we might have thought we've identified a problem in market, but as you're taking the pilot, go in with a really open mind and curiosity of listening not only to all stakeholders, but also engaging the students. So if it is student facing, letting the students have a voice in part of that development, particularly in that early stages. In terms of onboarding, and Sarah, I'm so sorry if I lost that part of the question, but I think the early stages are one of the things that we always did is try and be there in person. Again, it is those relationships. You are building those relationships if you are onboarding them. That relationship face to face, being there, listening, watching, observing will give you so much information around how they're using your product, how you think they might be using their product versus how they are actually using your product, and investing the time into actually being physically in that school would be probably something that I'd say is really important. And don't rush it. Some of the things that we hear when I get a lot of phone calls from early stage ed tech companies is they sort of think they have to go through this tick box of I'm going to pilot, now I'm going to get to the startup, and then I'm going to go to scale up. And it's like education takes a long time, where you start off with your product and what the market needs and what's happening and how they're going to use it. Really, take time, be patient, listen more, speak less.
Great advice. Cleo, anything to add to that?
I think great points, Nikki, and I think I would absolutely second that. Listening to your customer really deeply and listening to what they're saying and also what they're not saying, because they might often tell you what you want to hear, which can be a little bit, I guess, misleading in some essence. And so gathering feedback in a number of ways is helpful too, not just through conversation, but perhaps people, schools are busy places. And so find the different ways in which your pilot schools or your early adopters can provide you with feedback in a way that's easy for them. Because if it's easy for them, they'll be more likely to engage. I think, that idea, Nikki, as well, of, sitting sort of side by side with your customer and observing how they are using your product is really great advice. If you can, there's lots of ways that you can sort of sit and, watch people engage with the portal or the pages that you're designing, the resources. Sometimes it's a little bit more tangible. Sometimes it's hard to be in schools and observe how your program is being implemented. So think about the different ways in which you might gather feedback about all of those different stages. And that goes, it's not just the teacher or the principal or the wellbeing leader or the instructional coaches. It's actually the other people in the school as well who have some kind of contact with your product, and that might be in the business manager, it might be the school reception or administration. So there are other stakeholders in the school ecosystem that are still really important to understand. But then you also need to focus perhaps on those individuals who've got that purchasing power, who make those decisions around purchasing your product. I think one final word from me would be it's relationships. Like if you do not have relationships with people in schools, you need to invest the time, the heart. You need to be there as a genuine person who is really curious and interested about what's happening in their school, what their setting's like, what their students are like, what the parents are like, and taking the time to develop those relationships over a number of years. It's not an overnight thing, and you've got to be in there for the long haul.
Fantastic. Yeah, so being there for the long haul, building relationship, listening to educators, lots to take on from that. Next question is how to best market to schools programs that are not compulsory or life skills based. So, Nikki, I might go to you first again on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think we actually made a decision. So our name is Life Skills, but we actually sit within the PDH-PDE and the general and social capabilities. So one of the things that we made sure that we did was that we were part of the curriculum and that we were evidence-based and curriculum aligned with everything that we were doing, so that it wasn't such an uphill battle. So we'd come from the HPE or PDH-PDE background. I think, as we moved into metrics and as we moved into sort of insights, as long as we, and again, a lot of our evolution has been based off looking at and listening to the deep needs of our schools and what problems are we solving, and always making sure that we're not just another thing that they have to solve, but that we do the heavy lifting for them. And, I think Cleo said it beautifully. Schools are very, very busy places. And I think no matter whether you've got a curriculum aligned product or whether you're bringing in something that's not curriculum aligned, it needs to solve a problem, and it needs to be seamless, and it needs to be easy, and it needs to do heavy lifting and remove something for anyone within that school environment. Because none of us really need to go deeply, but the day-to-day activities, to bring in something new, something else has to be removed. So what is your product going to remove, and how is it going to create time and space for a teacher or an executive or anyone? And I think, Cleo, you touched on that too, your business administrator or your SAM, making sure that, if you are taking time, are you giving time back?
Cleo, anything to add to that?
Look, we do have our Pivot does have a wellbeing product as well, so we know what it's also like, sort of working in that space of where it is a little bit grey, it's a little bit fuzzy, not necessarily, it's a little bit more difficult perhaps for that school leadership level to maybe demonstrate sometimes the value or the impact of your program. So part of, I think, those conversations with schools needs to be coaching your users or your lead person in the school as to how they can advocate for your program or your software or whatever it might be, and showing them the different ways in which it can play a part in supporting learners and learning in the school. And that is done through, that questioning, the understanding the school setting, understanding what that individual in the school needs and the drivers for them. And so I think it's important to note that a lot of ed tech is not just set, forget, and you don't. It's a no touch kind of low touch experience. It is really important that you have your finger on the pulse of what your schools need, and I think we've discovered that, and we're really embracing it at Pivot. And we're building out our coaching programs and those opportunities for schools to really get the most out of Pivot and the services we offer. So yes, I feel like I've gone a little bit off track. Sorry, Sarah.
No, that's fine. That's all good.
No,
It's all valuable.
And I think that, sorry, I'm just going to jump in there because I think you're absolutely spot on, Cleo. Like in terms of, there's this kind of this mentality, if you build a SaaS platform, it's set and forget and off it goes, and it's going to, you're going to get this hockey stick. And just the reality is, education is always changing, and the needs are changing, and the curriculum's changing, and the government's changing, and everything's changing nonstop. And I think that, going right back to what we were both talking about, if you have those strong relationships and you're able to stay really, really close, it's not a set and forget. It's a continuous iteration, and you're continuously growing. And I think that requires not only all of your team, but also the leadership to be flexible, to really listen. And I think one of the things that you said at the beginning is, is this a trend, or is this something that's going to extend and has got lifetime? And I think it's a really, really good point when you're assessing a business, because you made the point of time, energy, money. It's not easy running. EduTech is not, it's not fintech. It's not, there's a lot of things. We're all here because there's a deep passion for education. You don't stay in education for a long period of time, or you don't even enter the market unless you really are deeply connected to the problem that you're solving and the community that you're working with. Sorry, I just thought I'd jump in there and just kind of, I think, it's a continuous iteration, slow, gentle, long.
Yeah, it's certainly a labor of love for many of the founders in EdTech, that's for sure. We've got actually a couple of questions coming in through Slido, so please keep them coming. We've got one asking, how do you measure social emotional growth? What is it assessed against? A rubric of emotions. So maybe Cleo, I'll get you to start off with that one.
Oh, that's really interesting. And look, I guess, there's over the development of Pivot's wellbeing tool, we really have honed into that idea of the wellbeing space as opposed to mental health, or I think the wellbeing tool and the instrument and the resources can certainly support social emotional learning, but it's a really nuanced space. And I think, Nikki, this is absolutely your jam too, but understanding what your product does and who it's for, and being able to communicate that with clarity is really important. So the way I speak to schools about the Pivot Wellbeing instrument and supports is that really it's about wellbeing for learning. So what we're trying to extract and understand about our students is how is their wellbeing fluctuating from week to week, term to term throughout the school year, and then to be using that data as well as our resources to support data-driven decision-making about student interventions and wellbeing programs, but also to be notified of students who are in need of some additional support and some additional intervention immediately. So that's kind of our space. So it's really interesting. So I feel like I might want to throw to Nikki to talk about the social emotional learning, because I think that's probably our program really supports the development of, I guess, the educators within the school then to look at the curriculum and how they might sort of bring that into the daily learning experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And I think that question, that's sort of the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And I think one of the things that we're really aware of is, the measurement of, say, social emotional well-being it's new. How do we ascertain? It's not like we can do a numeracy or a literacy test. It's not like we can put people in band or young people in bands. Part of taking a holistic view on what we've done here at Life Skills Group is, we sort of lent on, particularly my mentor and who I developed the programs with, which is Dr. Dan Siegel, not only really coming back to the stages of development of young people, but then also looking at how we're currently measuring, say, the well-being of a young person in a school. And historically, what we've done is we've measured it on their academics, their behaviour, and their attendance. And looking through that lens, we were able to identify that we're actually missing the young person. So a lot of what we were doing was being able to create more holistic data, real-time holistic data based on, and I think, emotions are one part of them, but when you sort of break down what social emotional learning is, emotions are only one part, and that emotional literacy is really that self-awareness part. But as we begin to get more of a view and we bring into the current way that we're measuring students' wellbeing through, attendance, behaviour, and academics, how can we then bring in a measurement and a tool to be able to sit within what has universally been how we've been viewing them? And that, in a way, has been a culture change. It's been a shift, and it's been not only the way that, and I think Claire just mentioned it, the interventions. How do we know how a young person is? How do we know how a cohort are? How do we know how a class is, a stage is, a school is? What's the health of it? And that's been a bit of a wild journey, and one that I'm sure we will continue on for the next 10 years. But it has been really looking at what are their current measures, what's missing, how do we be able to come right down to an individual student and ensure that no child falls through the gap. And that's been a very big mission of ours.
Well, I've got one more question as well from the audience. Did you do much user experience or user interface testing? And how did you go about this? So maybe Nikki, will start off with you first and then go to Cleo.
I just started giggling because I was thinking about, we did a lot of mock-ups. So we didn't, we had this whole, we didn't want to have dev debt. So we used, I think back then it was Proto.io or something. It was just a complete frame, mock-up frames that we used. And we would trundle this around and we would take it out and we would sit with different stakeholders in the school, and we continue. And I think, again, coming back to that word set and forget, the UI UX is critically important of every area and every feature release that we do. And it's not something that we just do once and throw out the door. We've got a very, very big part of our company, which is know your end users, really understand them and understand how they're using it and how we can constantly keep improving. So a commitment to getting started, first and foremost, was, well, we start on paper versions first, actually. That was the first one we did. We created wireframes, paper versions, then we went on to a mock-up. And as we began to build out, part of our processes and part of our release was actually doing a lot of testing, and at certain points bringing in specialist UI UX as well, and we continue to do that constantly.
Cleo, do you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, look, I think it's, as you're saying, Nikki, look, you do what you can with what you've got when you need to, and I think it's a little bit of resourcefulness. In our early days, we really just completely sort of agile. Had a developer that would just turn stuff overnight that we would then roll out and test, and internally testing between the co-founders. So go from real sort of hands-on, we did everything in the business for a very long time. But then, sort of as we kind of matured, around year 2 or 3, and began to expand our team and to be able to bring in additional resources, that's been really, I guess, that's kind of the next stage of growth that you undertake. And when you do start to build out your dev team and, get your tech stack happening, and, making sure that you've got that user testing and user interface testing built in is really important. Nowadays, we have our product team who will, sort of sit alongside and observe how our schools are using our new platform. We also have really good funnels of feedback coming from our account managers back to our tech team, and lots of, ongoing conversations about the experiences, and that sort of that immediate feedback from our schools. When something comes back in and they say, oh, what we'd love to see is this, or I don't know why that button does that, or I can't find that resource. We take it seriously and we listen, because you build that kind of, I guess, that mountain of feedback, and then you can start to see the patterns. But you need to make sure that you've got a way to record all of that along the way. So think about the systems that might enable you then to identify the trends in the feedback as well, because they can be really informative over the long-term period. You'll have immediate problems to solve, but then you might have bigger problems, which will be more expensive and take more dev time to actually overcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, talking about expenses and finance, let's talk a little bit about funding and investments specifically. Now, I have a couple of questions here around funding, but we've got some that are in the chat, so I might just go straight to them first and see what other questions we get to on my sheet here.
Yeah.
So, firstly, around raising capital. So, question here: we hear female founders have a tough time raising capital. Is that your experience? Either one, feel free to jump in.
Oh, Cleo, you can go first.
Okay, Cleo.
I'm kind of checking my filters here.
Yeah, we're switching gears a little bit. Yeah.
Look, I think, you know, we bootstrapped for a long time, and it was a matter of us, you know, working our day jobs and then working our pivot in the background, and, you know, late hours and early mornings and weekends and all of that. So, but there came a point where our team became, you know, we really needed to take our to the next stage. And so the process for us, though, was interesting. We had sort of done a little bit of preparation. We'd sort of like gotten our house in order. And look, that's something that maybe is a recommendation for others going through this journey, that maybe that is something that you should, you know, in hindsight, maybe it's better to do that along the way. Make sure you've got all the hygiene in place as you are building and growing, because because of the way we had grown, and it had been a little bit like, you know, like we'd put in extra lump sums, we'd put on extra people, you know, we'd get a government contract, you know, the sort of the way that we had grown had been a little bit sort of, you know, I guess lumpy. And, you know, it meant actually that we'd sort of had to go back and do a bit of kind of cleanup work, like nothing disastrous, but we had to get things in order to be able to go out and present ourselves for, you know, to look at raising. And so that was interesting, and a really, you know, we had a really actually great experience. We worked with Clinton Capital up in Sydney, terrific bunch of people, incredibly supportive, but it was also the support of others around us, you know, who knew us and had been working with us for a long time. You know, we'd been involved with EduGrowth and David and others in the space who, I guess, had helped to open doors over time. And I'm going to come back to my earlier point: relationships. You know, somebody is going to probably, most likely, invest in you as a person, and your commitment to your idea and to your product and to what the vision it is that you have for where you're going to take your company. And so it'll come down, I think, to a balance of that. It'll come down to your books and your data hygiene, but it's also going to come down to you and the founding team and the role that you're going to play in the long term.
And Nikki, anything to add about your?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think probably not going to get into the female founder, you know, that hasn't, you know, not being able to raise. I think if you've got a product, you've got product market fit, you've got usage, it's sticky, it's going to get funding. But I would say that one of the things, and I feel a little bit silly saying this, that Cleo said, it's all about relationships and investing and nurturing in your relationships and being integrous and honest and sticking to what you do best. And I think if you're able to do that and you're able to, you know, keep your hygiene, keep everything, you know, making sure that all your data, making sure that you might not be planning on fundraising until next year or the year after, but you can start now and you can start building relationships now, because you don't want to be out there and suddenly need to raise instantly. And our experience is that people will approach you, and that discernment, you know, I think, and I could be a little bit contentious here, you know, there's this whole thing that a startup, once you raise, is going to be successful, but there comes another whole lot when you take funding from someone. So we actually held back we still have not done a big fund. We haven't needed to for lots of reasons. And fundraising is not the ultimate goal. I think more so now, a sustainable business is really what people are looking for, and getting to that point where if you are going to raise, knowing really clearly what you're raising for, and having your usage, your metrics, your analytics, knowing your customer journey, being able to solve a lot of problems. It's a very different market now than it was, say, a few years ago. And I think building for scale, building with the right product, making sure you've got your security. We're in education. It has to have your basis of security. All the things that you might not think about until later, I'd start thinking about now, because that will all tie into when you are going to raise as well. So there's a bit of a backward forward way of answering it. But I think, yes, there is biases towards female founders in education, but I think that is overcome by doing what you do well, and running a really successful business. The biases are overcome.
Yeah. Well, I've got a question here which sort of leads, and you may have even covered some points of it. A question around those that are maybe new to the startup ecosystem in EdTech. Can you share what to expect in the way of support? There is also funding opportunities, but I feel like you may have answered the funding opportunities piece, but maybe more about support within the ecosystem. Maybe Nikki, go to you first.
Sorry, I was reading. I was listening to what Jeanette was saying to me. So sorry.
No, let me. Well, maybe I'll say it again, and then we can go to either Claire or Nikki. But about those who are new to the startup ecosystem, and specifically in EdTech, can you share what to expect in the way of support or funding opportunities? Just noting you sort of answered the funding piece. Anything to add there?
I think, and Claire, maybe you can jump in on this one. I think it's really hard when you're bootstrapping, when you're developing a product. I think there's this idea that everyone's out networking and supporting, and it's really challenging. You're working 18-hour days. I think EduGrowth has been a phenomenal support to be able to meet incredible people and mentors. Because you also do need to be protective of your time. You don't have a lot of time. I've got a family. I want to spend time with my family plus my 18-hour days. I think making sure that you're going to the right networking events or being part of EduGrowth is really, really critically important. And also I'm a big one for finding mentors. I will reach out on LinkedIn to someone who inspires me or something, and I have no qualms about sending and harassing them if there's something that I want to learn. And I think wrapping yourself around support. The other part that I'd add in as a founder, I sort of feel like I need to do my mental health part here, is making sure you have your own support systems for you too, because being a founder is not easy. It's really, really challenging. And I often say that we have a board for a company, but we also need our own internal board and people that are supporting us as founders. And that doesn't just you don't just get tapped on the head, but making sure you have those people that can help you, and also keep an eye on you, because sometimes you can as a founder, we can go off and end up in outer space for a little while, but making sure that we've got people that bring us back and make sure that we are taking care of our own well-being and mental health.
And Claire, anything to add there? Thanks for the EduGrowth bit, by the way, Nikki.
What was that? Sorry, what was that?
Thanks for the EduGrowth point too. That was great.
No, but it's true. It's true.
It is absolutely. You need those peak organisations that are, have your best interests at heart, which is growing the EdTech industry here in Australia, and also helping to make connections. I think, like Nikki said, like find your tribe. I have a bunch of amazing educators and those in EdTech who we've either worked with or had some kind of collaboration with, or I've even made friends on LinkedIn. Like I feel like LinkedIn is kind of my social networking. I guess it's on tap, and as you say, Nikki, we have busy lives at home. There are families, there are others to care for. And so you have to work out what's going to work for you. I really, education is it's a human-powered, human-centered sector. And so my favourite thing is like getting out to those conferences or those gatherings or those network meetings and actually just talking and connecting with other educators. And that's, I think, where you can derive a lot of and it might be, you might not speak to somebody, you might speak to them once a year, but, knowing that they have your back or that they might mention you or your company or what you do to somebody along the way, I find that that's really nourishing for me, that I know that, and I would do the same for them as well. So it's about, I guess, sharing the love in the EdTech space. We're actually, I think very few of us are actually direct competitors. And I think that's something that's really important to remember. What works for one school might not work for another, and that there's always perhaps somebody else who might be a better fit. And I think being really generous with your peers in that way in the EdTech space is something that also goes a long way. And maybe there's just some good EdTech karma there that I think I'm tapping into.
Yeah.
Look, a question sort of following on from that, specifically around supporting the educator to entrepreneur journey and piece. We've got a question here. This one's a little more skewed to the experience as a woman is an educator then going into EdTech. Do you have any advice for founders who are, educators looking to start an EdTech company?
Oh, I wish I had an easy answer to this. I have often over the years thought maybe there's a space for a teachers to EdTech CEO kind of group that could gather for commiserating drinks, or like Zoom cups of tea, whatever it is. I think that it's really hard, but reach out to those people in the sector who you think have got something to offer. I've had, like you, Nikki, I imagine like I have people just ping me on LinkedIn and say, oh, would you be happy to have a chat, or can I show you what I've been working on? And, I always am open to offering, like, you can give away an hour of your time, right? I know that is valuable, but also where else could that person then, how might they use that? How might they really tap into, ask you their burning questions, tap into your experiences. And if I can help somebody not make some of the mistakes I've made, then terrific. I think that's really worthwhile. So find people that you think could offer you something. Always go in and ask what you can do for them as well. But, I think just connect with others who you think have had a similar trajectory and may be able to, give you some guidance.
I think I'd also probably just add to that mindset. I think, being a non-tech founder, that mindset of we don't need to do it all, making sure that, we get really good people around us, and that a belief that, I speak to a lot of female founders, and you have to back yourself. You have to back yourself. And that belief where we can, and I think, we can find mentors, we can find information, but being curious and being open to continuously learning is really, really important. And looking at, particularly when I entered in, I remember my daughter laughing at me. She was like, Mum, you can barely use an iPhone and you're going to start developing software. Like, this is really quite funny. And the reality was, it was true, but again, coming back to, you don't need to be everything, as long as you know your problem, you know your customer, and you've got really your subject matter specialist in the area that you're in. And my experience has been, I've been really, really privileged that I work with the most incredible engineering team and product team, and I've had them for a really long period of time. And I think being transparent and honest and constantly upskilling myself as well has been part of that journey of transitioning from a non-tech person into building software and technology.
No. I have one more question for you. It might go to you, Cleo, first. Over your journey your startup journey, has the actual product you've developed changed much from the original idea you tried to address?
That is a really great question, and I think the short answer would be no. We still do a lot of what we originally set out to do, but have improved on that offering over time. We've refined it, we've sort of streamlined it, we've made it more, I guess, easier to use. The user experience, the interface, all of that has improved over time. We keep updating our research and we keep extending on what we do, but the core idea, which is, how can we gather information, insights, feedback about what's working or not working in our classrooms, and how can we then package that up in a way that teachers and school leaders can use that to drive school improvement. That is still really the core of what we do at Pivot. We've added on the wellbeing for learning piece, so there's another angle there for schools to be gathering, again, really relevant and timely data. But what we're really passionate about: how can we make schools better places? How can we help learners learn more successfully wherever they are?
Great. Nikki, want to add anything there?
No, I don't think we have a philosophy that we don't get into a lane that's not ours. Like, I think really making sure that we have a very strong values and mission driven sort of philosophy here. And I think we've just got better, simpler. Internally, we've uncomplicated ourselves. I think it's been around, I think we were internally very complicated because we had such a broad offering from the face-to-face division that we did. And it was really around, what are we going to double down on? What are we going to focus on? And committing to that, because there will always be, I was going to say the opportunities to pivot. I was just smiling at you, Claire, but there'll always be opportunities. There's always a big, large flashing light, or, kind of little shiny diamond over there. And I think the longer that I've been around, the more that I can notice that, do a risk analysis on it, assessment on it, kind of smile at it, put it down, and just keep getting simpler and simpler and simpler. And I think that's probably the lesson that we've learned, is stay in our lane, stay really true to what we're doing, and make sure we adhere to our internal values and our culture as well.
Look, we've got so many questions and so little time. Just trying to look at the ones we should wrap up on. Maybe we can do some sort of succinct spitfire answering. Question around: have you participated in government programs that you think are valuable? If so, which ones? Can either of you speak to any government programs or initiatives you've been part of? Maybe not. Maybe I can give you time to think about that one. All right, I'll give you time to think about that one. Let's go to, as a non-tech founder, I think this might relate to some comments you made earlier, Nikki. How do you manage technical people who are renowned for not being direct?
I think one of the things that I learned really early on was, I'm a teacher, I'm a communicator, I like to talk, and learning how they work, and really sort of focusing on listening to, not only my product managers, but I often think that my product manager is sort of like the bouncer between, the customer and me and the rest of the leadership team. I think it's not that they're not direct. I think one of the things that I've learned to deeply respect and understand is that their job is to solve problems and to think of ways to build what we're doing. So when I come in with my big, airy, fairy, amazing, kind of 15 million words, it's like, Nikki, I just need something really, really simple. What's the problem here? And that's been a really, understanding how they work, understanding the documentation, understanding the architecture of what they're building has been a really, and then deeply going away and studying that myself too, so that I'm able to speak that language. I'm able to speak the language of the code that they're using, and understanding it has been actually a joy. And I have found that, I'm really privileged that my engineers and product team have been deeply motivated by professional development around emotional intelligence and all those things. So we've kind of had this two-way street of how we develop our own communication and our culture, and laying that foundation from the top down and the bottom up has been really, really important to be inclusive in our workplace as well. So that, the engineers don't sit here and the salespeople don't sit there. It's an inclusive environment that we do speak the same language.
Mm.
Cleo, anything to add? Yep, jump in.
Look, Sarah, I just wanted to touch on the previous question, government programs that I think are valuable.
That one.
Yeah, we have to rack your brains. Like, what have we done for many years that we've been on projects? I think probably the most valuable, both I think for Pivot, but also I really derived so much from being a part of the EduTech Asia Global Victoria Trade Mission, which was run also with EduGrowth, and both myself and one of my co-founders have now participated on one. Belinda went to New York in 2019 maybe, and I went to EduTech Asia and Singapore at the end of last year. And I think the conference, terrific, amazing, but what was really incredible was actually connecting with all of the other Australian EdTech companies. So it's funny, you go all the way to Singapore to meet your comrades, but it was actually an incredibly validating experience to be able to talk and pitch your product endlessly for days. That is also really helpful as an EdTechpreneur, to be able to continuously refine what it is that you do and seeing how it hits the market. So I would absolutely recommend that to any young EdTech company.
Right. Well, I might jump in there just quickly. Sorry, I think, and that's an interesting one because you just reminded me I did one of those too. Sorry. It's like COVID sort of put this kind of like veil over it. And that's like, oh yeah, we did one of those. I think someone asked a question, what would you do differently? So I'm going to kind of just link a couple of the questions in here. One of the things that I'd do differently is I would continue on with the one-to-one sales. I think there's this big push around, if I go to government and, we get this procurement of this area, or we work with this diocese, or the issue at that point, if there's not stability or there's not product market fit, or if you're constantly iterating and developing more features, not only is the uplift to retrain them and to educate them on that product, but the other thing is if they're being forced to use something, your usage is going to be really, really low. So they might procure and purchase on a whole block of, area. One of the things that I think, until you have that ability to know that you're solving a problem, that your product is sticky, when you have that kind of buy-in for a large, I think the question was around, do I go users or do I go organizations or groups of things? Your usage, your ability to get feedback, going slow at the beginning, really knowing, I keep coming back to this, just slow, getting to know it, because you might have a big sale and you might have a whole area, but then you're going to find it really hard to raise because you've got no usage, no stickiness, and your retention rate's really, really low. So you want to have that sort of that lifetime value high, your usage high, and you want to know that you have got a product that is sticky and people can't live without.
And look, what I might do is get Cleo to answer that same question, Nikki, that you just got to. The one thing you'd change, the one thing you go back and do over if you could. Because Nikki, you masterfully answered 3 of those questions in one. No, it was great. It's a very time conscious. So maybe Cleo, if you want to add a little bit.
Yeah. The one thing I would do differently. Oh gosh, I have to think about that. But I think, I'm always a big believer that, look, you make the best decision at the time that you can possibly make. If I was going to do something differently, it would actually be about how I perhaps made sure that I didn't overwork myself. And like that's the thing that I would change. Nothing to do with how we, took a business through COVID, managed to keep on all our staff, most of our schools, that was really hard. But probably what I would do is I would actually make a little bit more time for myself, because I think I probably had put the business first for too long, at the top of my priority list. So I think it is really important. Like, I know we talk a lot about self-care. It shouldn't be underestimated, and make sure you do check in with yourself and see how you're tracking, or have some other people around you in your support network. Make sure they flag if they think you are going too hard and too far, because it's very easy to do as a founder of a business that is, try just one more email, one more meeting. I've just got to get that other proposal out the door. Be kind to yourself, because all good things will come, and sometimes you can put yourself in a position which isn't as productive as you would like.
I think that is a fantastic note to end on, Cleo. So what I'll do is thank you both so much for lending your time and your insights. I know we didn't get to every question here, but I think we got to a lot of really great ones. So thank you so much for your time. And yeah, we'll move on to wrap up the program here. I have a couple of things to end on before we wrap up. I'd like to invite everyone watching to exhibit with us at Innovation Alley at EduTech between August 24 and 25. So sort of echoing what Cleo said about the value of EdTech Asia, I'll echo that for the Melbourne program, EduTech Australia. So I think we have a couple of slides to show here, but it's a fantastic opportunity for early stage startups to showcase your solution to thousands of people that we expect to walk the expo floor at EduTech. It's also a great way to connect within the EdTech ecosystem with like-minded entrepreneurs and sort of get that support and mentorship that we were discussing earlier. If you sign up to exhibit at Innovation Alley, you will have access to a booth at Innovation Alley with your company name and logo, entry into the EduGrowth Shark Tank competition, where you can finesse your pitching skills to some really fantastic investors, access the EduGrowth demo space, have 2 EduTech exhibitor passes, have a listing on the EduTech event app and online directory, and also have your company listed on the EduTech and EduGrowth website. And you'll also enjoy some EduGrowth member benefits as a part of that as well. So if you're interested, there is an online EOI form to fill out on our website. The link will be available in the chat now. And if you have any questions, you can email innovation.alley@edugrowth.org.au. So that does bring our final Ask Me Anything session to a close. Thank you all so much for joining. If you have missed any of the sessions over the past 3 weeks, they are all available on YouTube. So we can send out a link to you there if you need. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thanks for watching.